Hello, my name is Sebastian Wilke, and this is a re-recording of my paper presentation at the YAML Congress 2019 in Krakow. The title of the presentation is Providing Access to Music Instruments and Recording Equipment in Public Libraries, Results from an International Survey. In the beginning, I would like to give you some background about myself, so you see where I am coming from with this paper. I work at Qatar National Library in Doha, and apart from being a national library, we are also serving as an academic library and as a large metropolitan public library. And most of my day-to-day work as a music librarian is actually located in the public library sphere. This is a picture of the library. It's a really beautiful, stunning building which was opened only recently 2 years ago. This is a picture of the interior of the building. You can see the main plaza of the library. And part of my job is to build a music studio within that library. We have one room where we provide access to music instruments and to recording equipment. And this is where my inspiration for this survey and paper came from. I wanted to look at other public libraries who are providing a similar kind of service and was interested to see their practices and possible challenges in doing so. The main aim of this paper is twofold. I hope to provide some interesting insights for libraries who are providing a similar type of service, but it could also serve as inspiration for colleagues who are thinking about setting up such a thing. My approach to this was an online survey. I used SurveyMonkey for this, and I didn't expect too many respondents. This is why I created a pretty extensive survey with about 60 questions. A lot of them were open-ended, so I would end up with both quantitative and qualitative data. After 1 month, I had received 11 respondents from different countries. You see the distribution here. And I think they provided enough input for me to draw some meaningful conclusions for this presentation. As you can see on this slide, I try to cover all areas of work that are related to this topic, starting from the naming and concept of the space to questions of staff, usage policy, what types of instruments are available, but also questions about the usage statistics and the maintenance, for example. I only have limited time during this presentation, so I will focus on some highlights that are most interesting in my point of view. If there's anything that I don't mention in the presentation and you would like to know more about, please feel free to get in touch with me and I'm happy to provide some more information about the findings. Let's start by having a look at the name and concept of the examples. If you look at the top of the page, you see a couple of similarities between them. A lot of times they are referred to as studios or sound studios. Then there's the digital component and also the component of creativity. When asked about where in the organization these spaces are located, most respondents said it's either part of the music library or part of a makerspace. Only in a few cases they were saying it's an independent unit within the library. No matter what they are called, they all have the same idea behind them, which is having a dedicated space within the library premises that gives free access to instruments and recording equipment. In fact, a couple of respondents really stressed on this point. They said it's really important for them to provide this for free, especially to people who cannot afford going to a professional studio or to buy the equipment on their own. Another important aspect is to encourage content creation and learning new skills among their users. And interestingly, in most cases, there's no particular target group for these spaces. To give you a better idea about how these spaces look like, I asked the respondents to provide some pictures of them. Here are some examples. It's important to notice that in most of the cases we are talking about a music studio like you see on this picture, a room with different types of equipment. Only in one case it was just one piano in a room. I had to include this one because it was such a nice idea. The next area we are looking into is staffing. Among the 11 respondents, about half of them said only 2 or 3 staff members are needed to maintain the space or service. The other half mentioned that 5 or more people are needed. I also asked them if these people are working part-time or full-time on this task. And in most of the cases, they said it's a mix of part-time and full-time staff. If you look at the bottom, you see what type of staff are used to work on this service. And there's a broad distribution. You can find music librarians, you can find other types of librarians, library support staff is mentioned a lot, but also digital design technicians in 2 cases and volunteers in 1 case. It's important to notice that if you are maintaining that type of service, you might want to look at people in your institution who have a general passion for music instruments or for the type of equipment that you are providing. So even if they're working in a completely other department, it might be valuable to include them somehow if they can work on the maintenance or they have specific knowledge about a certain type of equipment. Now we are coming to an interesting part which talks about the available instruments and equipment in the different examples. And as you can see, in most of the institutions, you can find some type of piano, clavinova or keyboard. Then there is a lot of equipment related to music production and recording, such as software, microphones and other equipment. And then you'll also find different types of guitars, drum kits, and other types of instruments or equipment, such as synthesizer or ukuleles. There's 2 things that I find interesting about this. One is that none of the respondents mentioned violins or other stringed instruments in that family, brass or woodwind instruments. I can think of 2 reasons for that. The first one would be that you need additional knowledge for the maintenance. Not everybody knows how to restring a violin, or it's maybe harder to find people in your institution who could help with that. And secondly, the hygiene aspect. If you think about cleaning a mouthpiece of a brass or woodwind instrument after it has been used, that might also be a barrier to providing it to the public. I asked the respondents also to indicate which are the most popular instruments or pieces of equipment among their users, and they mentioned on the top position recording equipment and software, and then also guitars and the drums. It's interesting to see that although the piano is on top of this chart, it was not mentioned very often. Let's have a look at some of the regulations under which you can use these rooms. Normally, you'll have to be a library card holder in order to make any booking. Usually, there's also an age limit, which ranged between 12 and 17 years. Sometimes you could also use the room at an earlier age with an accompanying person. In general, the libraries were very flexible in terms of how to do the bookings. This could either happen through the website or in person. The usual amount of a session that each user can book was between 1 and 6 hours, but the average was 2 hours. Usually, a user can have 2 sessions per week. One of the libraries mentioned an interesting other approach. They only allow for 1 active booking at a time, meaning that you have to finish your current booking before doing a new one. Reasons for that seem to be that they want to give more people the chance to have a booking and to keep the schedule less crowded. The next area I looked into was misuse. What happens if an instrument breaks or if something gets lost? And I got 2 types of responses from the people. The first one was along the line of, yes, this could happen, and if it happens, it would result either in a fee or in banning the user. This particular quote mentions another interesting issue, which is that sometimes it's very difficult to prove misuse. The rest of the library said that generally no misuse happens in their cases. The next couple of questions were dealing with user instruction. As you can see in this chart, most of the libraries are providing regular workshops or classes for their users to get introduced to the instruments or equipment. Another common approach is the usage of on-site instruction through staff or the use of online tutorials. About half of the libraries also make use of print brochures or leaflets. There are a couple of interesting things to talk about here. I asked the respondents to say which of the programs are most popular among their users, and it turned out that those are mostly about music and audio production. Also, most of the workshops and classes are one-off and not on an ongoing basis. In the case of the on-site instruction, one library had an interesting comment. They said that as an alternative to providing programs, they provide one-on-one assistance appointment times for their users. For the online tutorials, most of the libraries mentioned lynda.com. The next area I looked into was usage statistics. I was specifically interested about the number of bookings and the equipment used. As you can see in the first graph, most of the libraries are keeping track of the number of bookings. This either happens automatically through a booking system or manually by entering the information in an Excel sheet, for example. On the other hand, a majority of the libraries said that they were not keeping track of the equipment used. Only a few are using an automated way through a booking system, a half-automated way by scanning barcodes of the equipment, or doing it manually. If you think about it, this makes a lot of sense. The data about the number of bookings is already available, and it doesn't take much extra time to document them. If you want to know about the type or the number of equipment used, this would usually mean some extra effort or to establish a new kind of process. I also asked the respondents about matters of maintenance and securing their equipment. It turned out that both basic maintenance and advanced maintenance is performed in varying intervals that would range between daily to weekly to monthly. It's mostly done by the library staff themselves instead of outsourcing it to a company or service. As you can see in the lower chart, what is mostly secured is major equipment like instruments, followed by headphones and smaller items like cables or microphones. It is interesting to see that these numbers are a bit lower than in other answers I got. The reason for that I found out in my next question, where I asked about how the libraries are securing their equipment. Actually, most of them noted that they are simply locking away the instruments and the equipment in a cabinet, or that they are locking the whole room. And by doing so, they are making sure that none of the equipment and instruments are getting lost. Another popular way of securing equipment is using cable ties. This mostly applies to music technology equipment. Only one library mentioned RFID tags as a way of securing equipment. I had thought that this would be more. Now we are coming to the final but maybe the most interesting part of the survey, where I asked the participants to reflect on their experiences and to give some advice to other libraries. In this first question, I asked them to look back and to think about any areas of improvement or things that they should have done differently in hindsight. Several of the libraries said they were not happy with the acoustics of their recording space. This particular comment is interesting because it raises a unique issue of public libraries. Due to security reasons, you usually need to be able to see what's going on in all the rooms of the library. This makes it almost impossible to fully isolate your recording studio. One way to work around this is to buy a recording booth, which is usually only a few square feet wide and would have an integrated glass window. Another colleague mentioned the high amount of hours and time that is needed by their staff to assist the users in the recording studio. They are now shifting to a self-service type of approach in order to be more sustainable. I was also interested in learning about any surprises that the libraries had faced along the way. As you can see in the first two comments, many of them were really surprised about the popularity of the spaces among their users. Another interesting thing is mentioned here. If you are able to document a certain demand or the usage statistics, then you can use this as a very powerful evidence if you are asking for more money from your library administration to improve current equipment. Some of the colleagues also mentioned that their spaces are fairly popular among people who are producing podcasts. And it's of course a big surprise and a really good sign if local artists are coming and using your space for making recordings. From my own experience, I can tell you that these are the users that you want to talk to for advice and feedback on your current equipment and for future purchases. And of course, if there's a space in a library that you can use, there will be students who will use them. Next, I asked the respondents for any advice that they could give to other libraries who are planning on setting up a similar space or service. And I got some really great responses here. A lot of it is reflected in what we have already discussed during this presentation. Some of them said it's really important to engage staff who are passionate about the topic and also make sure that they are trained well, because this is by no means traditional library work. Another great piece of advice is to talk to your community from the very beginning. Then you can fine-tune what types of instruments and equipment you are buying, and you can make sure that is in response to the needs of your library users. Another colleague brought up again that it's very useful to have an automated reservation system. This will save you a lot of time. And finally, you can start small and then grow along the way. Just make sure to talk to your users, to the community, and see what the needs are. For the final question, I don't need any slide. I asked the respondents, do you recommend setting up such a space to other libraries? And they all responded yes. All of them thought that this is a very useful service for their communities. And again, lots of them brought up that this is especially relevant to those who cannot afford buying this type of equipment on their own. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and you could take away some useful information for your own work. If you still have questions or comments about the topic or about the results of the survey, please feel free to get in touch with me through email or Twitter. Thank you for listening.